The swing. As a kid, growing up in Pollock, I was fairly active. I used to play one-on-one headers a lot, which was a version of football, with both players defending their own makeshift goal from the ball, or the ball. Two jumpers would be used for the posts, and the ball was constantly punted back and forth. I was also quite a fast runner, but more of a 100 yards dash sprinter, not a cross-country endurance type. Although in those days, nobody knew the difference anyway. I was just known as being speedy. They called me Billy Whiz, and it did represent my school. I also was good at gymnastics at school and loved to climb trees in the summer. My youth was dominated by the river. It was only after leaving Glasgow that I became aware that I was brought up right next to the River Cart. Nobody called it that. It was just referred to as the river. The river bank area was a fascinating place to play. The Cart was right next to Linthall Road and very wide, with strong currents, and it had big trees running along the edge. Some of these trees had thick and wide branches, and so were ideal for climbing. We were told to keep away from the river because it was dangerous. I spent most of my time there. I used to try to get as high as possible up the trees, so high, if I fell, I would probably be badly injured, maybe worse. Me and my mate Harry once made a raft out of oil drums and a wooden pallet and sailed down the river late at night in the darkness. But that's another story. It was the river rats scampering along the bank that freaked us the most that night. During the day, now and then we would come across a rope swing that someone had put up. The swing would consist of a very long piece of thick rope, about 40 feet maybe, and at the bottom of the rope there would be a short bit of wood or just a knot to allow you to sit on the end. These ropes would be attached to the strongest and tallest trees right on the riverbank. There were different standards of swings. Some were quite short and not too exciting, and some were very long, but the swing I liked the best was too scary for most. It had about 60 feet of rope and was tied to a big tree branch that allowed you to launch yourself off from the main trunk and swing right out to almost halfway across the river. Fearties didn't go on this swing as they thought it might snap at any time. If it broke over the land, then you would get bashed up. If it snapped over the water, you could get swept away after you plunged into the drink. I could swim, so wasn't that scared of the water, but I didn't like the idea of hitting the grun, or ground. And so one sunny afternoon, a Saturday afternoon, me, Harry, Ali and Rab headed for the big swing. When we got there, we were glad to see it was unoccupied. If there had been bigger boys there, then we would not have had much of a chance to have a go. Rab was a big wimp, and so he was pretty reluctant to even go on the swing. Ali couldn't swim, and so made some feeble attempts at swinging a wee bit, but kept over the land. Harry was a bit tougher, and swung out a couple of times right over the river. The thing about this rope swing was its versatility. Depending where you launched from, usually just from the bank, and how much push you gave yourself, you could swing way out in elaborate arcs and be in motion for minutes. The rope would gather up twists of different types, and this led to ways of covering different areas of the land and water. It was at this point that Harry said to me that I ought to try a Moray Cowan. He then described that an older boy called Moray would climb up the main tree trunk a few feet and then leap off with great momentum and swing right out over the river. The rope would keep twisting and then eventually unwind in the opposite direction, and this would give you an extended time over the water. I fancied giving this a go, but I was no Moray Cowan. But the guys egged me on, and so I climbed up the trunk of the tree and got myself into the launch position. I had to leap off backwards and create spin so as to get a huge arc and extended time over the water. Before I eventually came back over the land, which then allowed me to leap off to safety. When you gave yourself a big launch, you would be suspended over the water for quite some time, circling around. After a couple of minutes, the arc would change the area it was covering, and you would start to circle over the land again, allowing you to jump off, and so I went for it. I left off of the trunk and swung way out, well over the water. I looked back at the guys on the bank. They looked so far away. It was a surreal thing, such freedom and excitement. It would be a wee while before I would be touching down on the ground, and so I was enjoying the exhilaration. As the rope spun me around, my back turned towards my mates on the bank, and I couldn't see them. At this point, you would normally be getting the piss taken out of you. There would be a lot of shouting, and then them saying that they could hear the rope about to snap and stuff like that. But something strange was occurring, something odd. It was all silent, no calling or anything. Silence. As I spun around so that the bank came into view again, I realised why. My mates had scarpered. They were nowhere to be seen. But what I then saw was enough to make me wet myself. Riley was standing on the bank, staring at me with the eyes of a predator, and there was a glint of sunlight coming off of something in his hand. He was carrying a machete, and I was dangling on a rope right in front of him. Riley wanted blood. My blood. I didn't hesitate for a second. I leaped off the swing, straight into the dark and cold water. The current was strong, but I somehow got to the opposite bank. I had no idea if Riley was pursuing me. I did not give myself the luxury of looking back. I scrambled up the faraway bank and proceeded to run. I ran and ran and ran in my saturated clothes, and then I ran some more. I ran all the way through Cardonald. I never looked back once. I had covered 2 miles by now, and then I saw someone in the distance on a bicycle. It crossed my mind that Riley may have stolen someone's bike and was using it to catch up with me, and so I headed for the railway tracks. I thought that if I crossed them diagonally, then it would be impossible for Riley to use his stolen bike to gain on me. By now my legs were burning. I was nearing exhaustion point, but I never stopped. I kept on going right the way through to Penlee, and then I finally ran out of energy. I collapsed to the ground, completely spent. I looked up with the certain expectation that Riley was going to be standing there with his machete raised up to strike, but he was nowhere to be seen. My head was swimming, my heart was pounding in my chest, but I was still alive. I never saw Riley again, ever, but a few years later I found out that he'd been jailed for several brutal murders.